So Sea-Link is the project that we're proposing, and it's a connection between Suffolk and Kent. So it's needed in order to reinforce, so that's to strengthen the electricity system. So looking forward to 2050 and net zero, with the increase in demand we're expecting there will be increased generation, and that generation will be from more renewable sources such as offshore wind in the North Sea, where we've got a plentiful supply of wind and a really good environment to be able to build offshore wind as a renewable energy source. But when that power comes on shore, it needs to be distributed around the country to where the homes and businesses where people need it. Sea-Link's part of what we call the Great Grid Upgrade, where we've got 17 projects up and down the country that are basically building that infrastructure to make sure we can meet the needs of demand for people and businesses as the future goes forward.
Now, obviously, the idea of decarbonising the energy grid is generally seen as a good thing, that's going to be better for the world, for tackling climate change and reducing our carbon footprint and all those kind of things. The concern is the fact that this is the spot that Sea-Link is going to come ashore, because this is, as you've already pointed out, it's a beautiful place. The wildlife here is really important, and people are seriously concerned that it's going to have a massive impact actually putting this project in here.
Well, we've got to strengthen the system in the areas where it needs strengthening. So the needs case for Sea-Link is to connect Suffolk, where we're near the Sizewell nuclear plant, the new plant that's going to be built, and there's several onshore wind connections coming into that area. So that's the function the link is giving us in Suffolk. In Kent, where there's lots of interconnection to Europe through the Nemo Link project, which connects to Belgium. There's at Grain, there's a connection to the Netherlands, and then further around in Hampshire, connections to France. And in southern Kent, connections to France indeed. So that the network in this area needs to be strengthened so that on windy days and when we've got too much power will flow through and out to Europe. And on still days when we don't have enough power, we can be importing power from Europe, and that will be able to be taken up and down the country to where it's needed. So the network needs to be reinforced in this area, so we have to find a suitable place to connect to actually provide that reinforcement.
And it's the suitability of the place that's the issue, because I think nobody questions the idea that we've got to strengthen the grid and that we've got to upgrade it to make it possible to connect all the new wind farms and the solar panels and all the rest of it and balancing it. Now we know that there's lots of technical reasons why that has to happen. It's just the fact that the link's going to come ashore here in Pegwell Bay rather than anywhere else.
So when we developed the project, and we've been developing this project for the past 5 years, we've looked at numerous options. We have to connect in the Richborough area near to Richborough substation. There isn't the capacity at Richborough substation to connect directly to the substation, which is why we proposed connecting to the overhead lines nearby. But what we did when we've developed the project, and we've consulted on this through multiple rounds of consultation, is we looked around the North Kent coastline. We looked at multiple different options for where we could land the cable, but we have to balance up what the engineering suitability is, what the ecology is, the impact on local people, with also value for money for bill payers, to find the best solution that balances all those things. So all the marine constraints, because there's a huge amount of protected areas and areas of ecology offshore, the constraints onshore, and where we need to connect. So we think that Sea-Link, as it's proposed at the moment, gives the absolute best balance of all those factors.
There are people who would argue that it's certainly the least expensive option in terms of value for bill payers, but it's not the least environmentally damaging option.
So it's not I wouldn't say it's the least expensive option, it's about best value for money for bill payers. So
what's the difference?
Well, cheapest is not necessarily best value for money. So, for example, we're going to be drilling underneath Pegwell Bay. We're not going to be open cutting Pegwell Bay. That is a far more expensive solution, but it's the right solution to learn from what projects have done in the past, and to learn what's the best solution to both protect this area but also ensure we can deliver that infrastructure that's needed.
Okay, so the actual physical work that's going to happen with the cable laying, and people were disappointed with the way that Nemo happened, because National Grid gave an undertaking at the time that Nemo was going to be trenchless technology. You're shaking your head.
Well, I think so. I've talked closely with the Nemo team, and the Nemo team always proposed to do an open cut. As you'll be able to see from where we're stood here, the cable runs across this old landfill site, and out towards the Richborough power station. There's no way you could have drilled in here because it's contaminated ground, which is why they always had to open cut and put the cable above ground here. Where we're going to, we can use a trenchless solution, and that's what we're going to do. So it's important that we are clear that Nemo never proposed to use an HDD. They always proposed to HDD under the road, which they did do, but they never proposed the landfall as HDD.
Because behind us here, you can still see, and there's a couple trying to walk up onto the top of it, the Nemo link is covered in chalk, which as soon as it's wet is incredibly slippery, and 7 years on from that trenching going through, still hasn't grown back over. People are worried that they're going to have the same thing again, that when push comes to shove and work actually starts, if trenching happens rather than the underground solution, for whatever reason, you're going to end up with another scar and another amount of disruption actually happening in the bay and across the marshes.
So the work we've done over the past 5 years is to prove that the trenchless solution is workable and feasible. So from where we're going from behind the other side of the golf courses out into Pegwell Bay, we've done ground investigations to prove that the ground is suitable, and it is suitable for us to do that methodology. It would be almost impossible to do an open cut solution given the route and the challenges of coming through the golf courses and up there. So HDD is the best solution. And so that is, we believe, absolutely deliverable, and that's the solution we'll be consenting.
So the site is going to be, half a mile offshore? That's where the cable's going to disappear into the tunnel, for want of a better word, that's going to go under the marshes, is that right?
Yeah, it may not be quite as much as half a mile offshore, but certainly will be, from where we drill, it will be 800 to 1,000 metres from the other side of the golf course, so it will be out into the mudflats in the bay, and then the cable will be taken out. So we drill from onshore out to offshore, and there'd be duct inserted that would be roughly 12 inches wide, and that's where the cable would be installed.
The other sort of big issue that people are really concerned about is the size of the buildings that are going to be put on the marshes where the cable comes back up on the other side of the golf course. That the converter station and the substation, it's covering something like 22 acres of land, is that correct?
It's about 9 hectares. I'm not sure in acreage, but it's about 9 hectares the size.
So it's around that sort of mark.
Two fields,
so it's a big site, and the building's going to be best part of 100 foot tall.
Yeah. So the current proposals are for a 28 metre high building, including the ground that needs to be made up.
That is going to have a colossal impact on the area, and given the fact that there's a triple SI. This is a Ramsar site. It's a national nature reserve. That the way that the salt marshes and that the freshwater marshes interact, and the bird life goes backwards and forwards, that they feed on the mud at low tide and then they go inland. Once you put 22 acres worth of building on it, and all the lighting and all the noise and all the disruption, that's going to have an enormous impact on the wildlife down here. You can't get away from that, can you?
We absolutely understand the concerns around wildlife, and we are working incredibly hard to employ the right ecologists to do the right studies. So we've been doing surveys for the last 2 years to understand actually what the use is and what the link is between where we're proposing the infrastructure and the bay here. What we understand is there are certain birds which do use that area. We're in the field when the crops are off, whether they use it for foraging. What we're proposing in our latest proposal, which we consulted on this year, is to create some additional wetland, which is absolutely the perfect habitat for those birds. So rather than being foraging in an arable field, we'll be creating wetland habitat. The other side of the railway line, adjacent to the River Stour, we've identified some land that would be suitable with our ecologists, that would actually, once it's functional, which it would need to be before we started work, will provide a better habitat and will actually give those foraging birds a better place to go rather than the current arable field.
Okay, so is that an actual pledge from National Grid that if this work does go ahead, that there is going to be an equivalent amount of land that you're building on is going to be made suitable wetland site that is currently arable land at the moment?
So what we're doing is making more than an equivalent. We've got at least 10% biodiversity net gain pledge. So what we'll be doing is we are working with Natural England to understand what that land, that mitigation land needs to look like. But we're also working with Kent Wildlife Trust Consultancy, as well as the Environment Agency and other relevant statutory bodies, to make sure we've got the best solution that it adapts to the environment it's in and accommodates all the constraints, but also then that we can make sure we deliver back more BNG than to leave the site in a better place than when we arrived.
I had a conversation with Sir Roger Gale a few weeks ago up at the House of Commons. He's the local MP. He's deeply against this project happening here. He believes that this cable should in fact be coming ashore at Kingsnorth, which is a former power station that obviously has lots of associated structures around it and is a less environmentally sensitive site. Why can't this cable come ashore at a completely different point somewhere around the Kent coast?
So as I mentioned earlier, the needs case for Sea-Link is about reinforcing the network here. Kingsnorth.
Do you mean specifically East Kent?
Specifically East Kent, yeah. So to the east of Kelmsley is where we need to connect. So the Canterbury substation there's not sufficient room, and on the North Kent Marine side, the constraints were too great. Coming in through the Thames estuary, very, very challenging to get in through that geography. So here is the best location where we can connect. Connecting at Kingsnorth or Grain is not an option because the system is not the same need to be reinforced there. So if you were to connect there, you'd have to bring new overhead lines down to this part of the county, and that would not only be more expensive, but it would be more above ground infrastructure that would be far more visible than what we're planning to build here.
Power cables, the pylons, how much extra pylons are going to go in as a result of this build?
So in the latest plans, we're looking at removing 2 existing pylons and I think building 9 new pylons. So effectively what we need to do is turn those overhead lines into the new site. So there will be, to actually get the radius to turn in, we have 9 new pylons to bring the existing lines over the river and over the railway and into the new site.
Because as you'll know, a few years ago there was an incident where I think it was 179 swans were all killed in the same incident, where pylons had gone in, a flock of birds, just because of the geography and the light, and the birds following each other, they all flew into the pylons, and it's quite a grim thing to have happened. People are really very worried about the idea of any extra overhead power lines going in on an area that is deliberately going to be designed, and you've said it already yourself, you're going to be putting in mitigation to have this extra land that birds will come to. You're going to have more hazards for the birds to fly into.
So as part of the ecology work we've been doing, we've done extensive bird flight surveys on the Stour and the surrounding area, and the overhead lines will be designed to make sure that they minimise the likelihood of that happening. We'll also be using bird deflectors, which are additional items that you place along the wires which make them far more visible and reduce the likelihood. But as part of our ecology and what we submit with our planning consent, we'll set out all the studies that say that the risk is minimal, and that's not something we think is a concern when we bring forward the project for planning.
And as a final thought, I mean, you're the guy who's making the ultimate decisions on this as a project. Are you personally comfortable with what you're doing here? When this is done, will you be comfortable to come back here and have a chat about what you've done and talk us through it? And you're going to be responsible for it. Are you comfortable with where you're at?
Absolutely, yeah. I think when the project's built, I would envisage standing here talking to you about all the good things we've done, how maybe we've worked to help improve the Triple SI site through helping with the management of it with some of our biodiversity net gain, how we've got a building that hopefully will sit very well in the landscape, and maybe it's got a green roof or it's got some treatment that make it settle into the environment, and how actually we're looking at the Pegwell Bay here, and you'd never known that the Sea-Link cables had come through. That's where I expect we'd be once the project's built.
Because with the building, I know that people listening to this will be thinking, well, it's a 100-foot building covering 20 odd acres of land. It's going to be lit up at night. It's going to have a huge impact on the wildlife in the area. It is right next to a Triple SI. It doesn't really matter what you do. It's still going to cause an enormous disruption. It's not going to be better afterwards.
Well, the building will sits naturally down the slope of the hill. So although 100 foot high is right, when you're looking at it from the height with a green roof, if we put a green roof on, for example, it will settle in the environment, we believe, and that's the reason we've chosen that location. Is it's adjacent to the sewage treatment works and the Richborough Energy Park, so it continues that theme of industrial link through that area. Absolutely, I can understand people's concerns, but it won't be an operational. It will operate 24/7, but it won't be a manned site. So it will not necessarily need to have any lighting on at night, just minimal site lighting. So it won't be a big bright beacon in the evening. It will be minimal lighting that's necessary for safety on the site, rather than lighting for people being operating and working there.
So can you give us an undertaking then that all the stuff you told us today is going to come to pass? That if this, people will still be protesting about this, people will still be upset and angry about the fact that this is going to happen at all, that all the mitigation factors that you say National Grid are going to put in place, they're definitely going to happen?
They are, absolutely, and as we have been throughout the whole development of it, we'll continue to work with Natural England, with the Environment Agency, with Kent Wildlife Trust, to make sure that we can absolutely deliver the best value for local people as far as the natural environment and increasing that biodiversity. And we have a corporate pledge, but it's the right thing to do as well, to say we will be delivering upon that, because we wouldn't be promising it if we weren't going to.
And if somebody were to come up with an alternative plan and say, well, actually we could do something differently, is the door open to that?
So where we're at the moment, we've consulted 3 times now, and we're preparing our planning application to go in early next year. So we'll be reviewing the input and the feedback through that change control process of the last consultation, which just closed. But we've had all the feedback through the process on our plans from all our statutory bodies and stakeholders. So until we've gone through that next design freeze, I can't say exactly what the plans going in will be, but there will be a development of what we've consulted on so far.
Okay. Adrian, thank you very much.
Thank you.